Passed the bar exam on my first attempt, top 15% in the state, and my father told everyone at my graduation dinner that he had always believed in me. 3 weeks later, he called the managing partner of every firm where I had applied and told them I had stolen client files from his practice. For 8 months, no one would hire me. He thought that would be enough. He thought I would come back. He did not know about the letter my grandmother had left with her attorneys 7 years before she died. I need to take you back to understand how we got there. Not to the graduation dinner, not even to the bar exam. Further back, to the family that made me and almost finished me. My father is a personal injury attorney in Charleston, South Carolina. 3rd generation. His grandfather built the practice from nothing in the 1950s. His father grew it through the 70s and 80s, and my father inherited it at 32 and spent the next 20 years turning it into one of the most recognized names in the state. His name is on the building. Literally. Gold letters on dark glass. I grew up thinking that was the most important thing in the world. My mother died when I was 9. Breast cancer. Fast and merciless. After that, it was just the two of us and my younger brother, and my father ran the house the same way he ran his practice, with complete authority and no tolerance for deviation. My brother was the easy one. He was not interested in law, wanted to study environmental science, and my father waved that away like it was a hobby. Boys could have hobbies. Boys could find their own path. My father smiled at my brother's choices and called them endearing. I was different. I was the one who was supposed to carry the practice forward. I did not argue with that. I wanted it, or I thought I did. I was good at it. Top of my class at the University of South Carolina School of Law, law review, moot court champion 2 years running. My professors said I had the instincts. My father said I had potential, always not quite there yet, always a little more to prove before I would be ready. I should have recognized that for what it was earlier. I did not. The first year, I clerked for a federal judge in Columbia. My father approved of that. He came to the swearing-in ceremony and shook hands with the judge and smiled at me in a way that felt like ownership rather than pride. After the clerkship, I came back to Charleston and told him I wanted to spend a year at a litigation boutique before joining the family practice. I wanted to see how other firms operated. I wanted to develop my own style before I folded myself into his. He said no. Not no with an explanation. Just no. Said the way you say no to a child asking for something unreasonable. You come straight to the firm. You start as junior associate. You work under Harold. Harold was his senior partner, a man who had never once looked at me without looking first at my chest. I said I needed a little time. He said I owed him 6 years of law school and the clerkship and all the doors that had opened because of his name. I owed him, and the way to pay him back was to come to the firm, start at the bottom, prove myself on his terms. I had heard those words before. Prove yourself, on his terms. I said no. That was the word that changed everything, a 2-letter word I had been building up to my entire life. He did not raise his voice. My father never raised his voice. He straightened his cuffs the way he always did when something had displeased him, and he told me that I would regret that decision. He told me the legal community in Charleston was smaller than I thought. He told me that his name opened doors in this city, and his name could also close them. I told him I understood. I did not understand, not yet. The applications went out that October. 12 firms, ranging from the largest practices in the city down to the mid-sized boutiques I genuinely wanted to work at. I had a federal clerkship, strong references, a bar score in the top 15%. I expected callbacks. I expected interviews. I expected the ordinary machinery of a job search to do what it was supposed to do. What I got was silence. One after another, the rejections came back. Form emails. After careful consideration, we have decided to pursue other candidates. No explanation, no feedback, no interview offers. A few places did not respond at all. After the 4th week, I called a classmate who had just started at one of the firms that had rejected me. She sounded uncomfortable on the phone. She said she had heard something. She would not say what. She told me to call her back in a few days and hung up quickly. I called her back in a few days. She told me a partner at her firm had mentioned, in passing, that a senior attorney in the local bar had some concerns about me, that I had taken confidential client materials from a practice I had interned at, that there had been a family situation, that it was being handled privately. Client materials, family situation. My father was the only family member I had ever worked for. I had clerked for him 2 summers during law school, filing motions, sitting in on depositions. I had never taken a single document that was not assigned to me. I called 3 more firms that week, asked for informational conversations. 2 took my calls. Both said variations of the same thing, gentle and imprecise, something about concerns from a respected member of the bar. One person felt so bad about it she basically told me outright it was my father, and he had been very persuasive. I drove to his office. He was in a meeting when I arrived. I told Margaret, his receptionist, who had been there since I was in elementary school, that I would wait. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something between pity and guilt. She brought me coffee I did not ask for and went back to her desk and did not meet my eyes again. He kept me waiting 40 minutes. When he finally called me in, he closed the door and sat down behind his desk and looked at me the way he looked at opposing counsel. Assessed, unsurprised. I said, "You told them I stole files." He said, "I told them what I knew." I said, "I never took anything." He said, "You took 8 years of investment. You took my name and my connections and everything I built and then decided you were too good to use it for the purpose it was meant for. I told people to be cautious. That is not slander. That is professional responsibility." Professional responsibility. I sat there looking at the man who had taught me what the law was for and felt something shift inside me. Not break. Shift. Like a tectonic plate moving into a new position. I asked him what it would take to stop. He leaned back and crossed his hands over his chest and said, "Come to the firm. Work under Harold for the first year. Show me you can follow before you try to lead. In a few years, when you have proven yourself, we can talk about your own caseload, your own clients. But you come to me first." Under Harold. For a year, as punishment for wanting to do things my own way. I stood up. I said, "I will not do that." He said, "Then this conversation is over." I said, "Yes, it is." I walked out. My hands were shaking. I made it to the parking garage before I sat down on a concrete step and just breathed for a few minutes, not crying. Past crying about my father. Just processing. That night I got a text from my brother. Dad told me what happened. "Are you okay?" I called him. He listened without interrupting, which was the thing I had always loved most about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said he did the same thing to Grandma Renata, you know. Took credit for her cases for 20 years. I had not known that, not the details. My grandmother on my father's side, she'd been an attorney too. One of the first women admitted to the South Carolina bar in her era. She practiced alongside my grandfather and then alongside my father until she retired. The firm had her name on it once. It did not anymore. I had asked about that as a teenager and been told she had chosen to step back. That was all I was told. My brother said, "She talked to me about it a few times. Before she died, she said she had done something about it." I asked him what he meant. He said, "She said she had made sure you would be okay." I didn't really understand what she meant, but she said your name specifically. She said she had left something for you with her lawyer, but only if you needed it. Only if you needed it. My grandmother died 3 years before this, when I was in my 2nd year of law school. I had been at the hospital. My father had arrived 40 minutes after she passed, briefcase still in hand, and spent most of the time there making phone calls in the hallway. My brother and I sat with her. My father collected her files and had her office cleared by the end of the week. I had not thought much about her specific instructions to her attorney. I had assumed it was standard estate administration. A few personal items, some money set aside. I found the attorney's name in the probate records I pulled up that same night. His name was not one I recognized, not part of my father's circle. A small solo practice in Mount Pleasant, across the bridge. His name was Aldous Webb. I called his office when they opened the next morning. His assistant put me on hold for 2 minutes. When he came on the line, he did not sound surprised. He said, "I have been expecting this call for about 3 years. Your grandmother told me you would come when you were ready." I asked him what she had left. He said, "She left you 2 things. The first is a letter. The second is a package that she asked me not to describe over the phone. She said you should come in person." I drove to Mount Pleasant that afternoon. His office was in a converted house near the water, azaleas blooming out front, the smell of salt air coming through the window he had left open. He was in his 70s, small and precise, with the kind of careful manner that takes decades to develop. He shook my hand and brought me into a small conference room and set a manila envelope on the table between us. He said, "She came to me in 2016, paid my retainer in cash. She said she did not want any record her son could find. She gave me this and told me to hold it until her granddaughter came asking, or until 10 years passed, whichever came first." I picked up the envelope, my grandmother's handwriting on the front, my name, and beneath it, "For when he leaves you, no other choice." She had known. She had known exactly what my father was capable of, and she had spent years making sure I would not face it alone. Inside the envelope was a letter and a thumb drive. The letter was 6 pages, handwritten, dated 2016. She started by telling me she was sorry. Not in a vague way, she was specific. She was sorry she had not fought harder when my grandfather first started taking credit for her work. She was sorry she had modeled silence as a strategy instead of strength. She was sorry she had watched my father learn that lesson and apply it to everything he touched, including eventually me. She had watched him, she wrote, for years. She had watched how he talked about me to colleagues, the slight undermining, the faint praise designed to create doubt. She had started documenting it in 2014 when I started law school and it became clear what he intended. She had kept records. The thumb drive contained those records. 7 years of emails my grandmother had been forwarded by contacts in the bar, conversations she had with colleagues who had heard my father talk about me, dates and names and specific language. A letter from a former client who had overheard my father on the phone saying his daughter had a problem with professional ethics, said 2 months before I even graduated. He had started before I even graduated. There was something else in the package. A signed statement from my grandmother, notarized, describing in detail 4 cases from the 1990s in which she had done the primary legal work and my father had presented it to clients under his name, with case numbers, with her original research notes, photocopied and organized, the kind of documentation that could, if the right person saw it, reopen very old questions about professional conduct. At the bottom of the letter she'd written, "I am not asking you to use this as a weapon. I am asking you to use it as a door. Find someone who will see you clearly and show them the truth. The rest will follow." I drove home with the envelope on the seat beside me and sat in my apartment for a long time just thinking. Then I started making calls. I had clerked for a federal judge. That judge had retired and now chaired the board of a legal aid organization, but more relevantly, she was on the diversity committee of the state bar. Her name was Judge Patricia Harlow, and when I called her, she answered on the second ring. I told her I needed to meet with her. I told her I had documentation of professional misconduct involving a senior member of the Charleston bar. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How soon can you come to Columbia?" I went the next day. I laid out everything on her conference table, my grandmother's letter, the thumb drive, printed into a binder, the statement about the appropriated cases, the pattern of calls my father had made to the firms where I had applied, reconstructed from the conversations I had collected over the past weeks. She read everything carefully, the way a judge reads, without expression. When she finished, she looked up at me and said, "Your grandmother was a meticulous woman." I said she was a lawyer. Judge Harlow said. She was a very good one. I knew her actually, briefly, early in my career. She helped me with something once. I did not know what happened to her at that firm. Now you do, I said. She was quiet again. Then she said, I want to be clear that I cannot guarantee any specific outcome. What I can tell you is that this documentation is serious, and it deserves a serious response. The bar has processes for this. I know it does, I said. I went to law school. She almost smiled at that. She said, there is also a litigation boutique in Columbia. Renata Shields runs it. She is excellent. She is excellent. And I happen to know she is looking for a junior associate. She does not know your father. Would you like me to make a call? I said yes. That was in March. By May, I had an offer from the Shields firm. By June, I had started, had my own desk, my own case assignments, a supervisor who evaluated my work on its merits. The salary was not spectacular, but it was real and it was mine, and nobody there knew my father's name except as something that appeared occasionally in headlines. The bar investigation into my father's conduct opened quietly that summer, based on my grandmother's documentation and 3 statements from former colleagues who had apparently been waiting for someone to ask. I was not the complainant. Judge Harlow had helped route it through appropriate channels. I stayed out of it as much as I could. He found out I was at the Shields firm in July when a mutual acquaintance mentioned it. He called me once. I let it go to voicemail. His message was controlled and cold. He said I was making a mistake. He said I had no idea what I was doing. He said the people I was working with were second tier and I was throwing away a future that most lawyers would have given anything for. He said, when this backfires, do not call me. I did not save the voicemail. I did not need to. I had plenty of documentation already. What I did not expect was my brother. He called me 2 weeks after my father called, not angry, worried. He told me what he did, the calls to the firms. I asked my brother if he had known before. He said, I suspected, I did not know for certain, and I am sorry. I should have said something sooner. I told him it was not his responsibility to manage our father. He said, I know, but you were my sister, and he is our father, and I have spent a long time telling myself that staying out of it was neutral. It is not neutral. I see that now. That conversation mattered more than I can explain. Not because it changed anything practically. It did not, but there is a particular loneliness in being targeted by a parent. A specific way it rewrites your sense of what is real. And having my brother say plainly that he believed me and that he was sorry he had not said so sooner. That filled in something I had not known was hollow. In September, the bar issued a formal notice of investigation to my father. His name appeared in a list of pending matters on a quarterly report that circulated among members. It is public record, if you know where to look. He retained outside counsel. The process will take time. I am not waiting for it. I have my own caseload now. A wrongful termination case that I have been building for 4 months. A medical malpractice matter that goes to deposition in the spring. A landlord-tenant case that sounds small but involves a pattern of violations across 30 properties and is going to matter to a lot of people. I stay late some nights not because I have to, but because I want to, which is a feeling I did not know I was missing until I had it. Last month, Judge Harlow called to tell me the Shields firm had been nominated for a state bar pro bono award. My name was listed on one of the matters. I sat in my car in the parking garage after I got that call and thought about my grandmother in her office in the 1990s, doing the research, preparing the arguments, watching someone else put his name on it. She gave me the door. I walked through it myself. My grandmother's name was Lorene. She practiced law for 31 years in this state, and her name came off the building and her cases went into files under other names, and for a long time it seemed like that was just the way things were. Her name is in the bar investigation now. Her original research notes are exhibits. A legal administrator who processes bar complaints told me very carefully and off the record that the documentation was among the most thorough she had seen. Of course it was. She had 30 years of practice and she knew exactly how this worked. I keep her letter in the top drawer of my desk. Not the copy, the original. 6 pages of handwriting that started with an apology and ended with the only inheritance that ever mattered. The truth, in writing, witnessed and dated, left with someone who would keep it safe until I was ready to need it. The last line of her letter was this: I could not fight for myself the way I should have, but I prepared the ground. The rest was always going to be yours. She was right, it was. I think about my grandmother a lot these days, not the version of her that existed at family dinners, quiet and careful, always deferring to the men in the room. The other version, the one who spent years building a paper trail in secret, paying a lawyer in cash so there would be no record her son could find, writing 6 pages by hand that she knew she might never see delivered. That version of her is the one I carry with me now. There is a cause and effect to everything that happened, and I have spent enough time with it to see the shape clearly. My father believed that controlling the information meant controlling the outcome. He made calls. He used his name like a weapon, and for 8 months it worked. I could not get an interview, could not get a call back, sat in my apartment redesigning my resume for the 11th time, wondering what I was doing wrong. The isolation he created was the point. When you cannot get anyone to tell you why the doors are closing, you start to believe the problem is you. That is what he was counting on. What he could not account for was that someone had seen him coming long before I did. My grandmother was the most intelligent person I have ever known, and I mean that in a specific way, not book intelligence, though she had that too. I mean the kind of clarity that comes from watching how power actually operates, not how it presents itself. She had spent 30 years inside a system that took her work and put other names on it, and she had not become bitter or resigned. She had become precise. She documented. She planned. She found a lawyer outside my father's circle, and she paid him in cash, and she wrote down the truth while she still could, in her own hand, with case numbers and dates and exhibits. That is not the act of someone who gave up. That is the act of someone who decided the fight was worth preparing for, even if she would not be there to see it. I did not have that clarity when I walked out of my father's office. I had rage and a shaking drive home and a brother who answered the phone. What I had to build, over those 8 months, was the steadiness to keep going without knowing whether any of it would resolve. That steadiness is not something you are born with. It is something you develop in the specific conditions of having no other choice. Every morning I woke up and chose not to call my father and say I would take the position under Harold. Every morning that choice got slightly easier, not because things got better, but because I got more certain of who I was when I made it. The 3 things I needed, I now understand, were already inside me when I walked out of that building. I needed to know right from wrong clearly enough to refuse a path that was dressed up as opportunity. My grandmother modeled that. I needed to be smart enough not to act on rage, but to act on evidence, to find the right people and present the truth in a way that could not be dismissed. She modeled that too, and I needed to be stubborn enough to keep going through 8 months of silence and rejection without surrendering to the one person who kept an easy door propped open just for that purpose. She prepared the ground. I had to walk it myself. The letter is in my desk drawer. I open it sometimes, not because I have forgotten what it says, but because there is something in her handwriting that steadies me. 6 pages from a woman who could not fight in the moment she needed to, but refused to leave without making sure I could. That is love with a long horizon. That is the kind of thing that does not announce itself until the moment you need it most, and then it is exactly enough.